So, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Um, Due to some technical issues and some issues with my presentation, I want to back up a little bit and start from what actually is it that we are trying to understand, and what is it that we see with young children that gets the attention or needs to be paid attention to. So, if we are talking about everything developmental, which starts first day of the last cycle for the women, 2 weeks from that point, add 4 to 6 more weeks, every major organ system has already developed. So by the time most women find out that they're pregnant, the circulatory system, nervous system, it already has started to develop. So when we already know that vitamin B12, for example, or folic acid, for example, are the main ingredients for nervous system development. And unfortunately, the way our diets are, the way that the country that we live in, there are a lot of deficiencies that we run into. And that's why it's not necessarily what can be done or what needs to be done and when. It has to be a more standardized approach. Most women in reproductive age should be on vitamin B12 folic acid. It's not something that your body can store or get toxic on, so you take it. If it's extra, your body flushes it out, you're good. You need it for pregnancy. There is no substitute for it. And again, by the time most women find out, they finally go see the doctor and get started on multivitamins or folate, you may have already passed that window where the initial development had taken place. So we're talking about that level of early understanding and anything that is needed to help the mother from that point onwards. Now you are talking about a 2-year-old who is unable to do certain things, who has difficulty with their communication by the way of words, but are they compensating with the nonverbal communication? They're not saying the words, but are they seeking your attention? Are they taking you to something that they need? Are they showing any frustration when you offer something and that's not something they want? And then you would try a few things and you finally figure it out. As long as there is an attempt to communicate, that's a start. Child is still very young. Everybody has their own trajectory of learning. Give them some time, give them the environment, give them the opportunity where let's see how things go. Unfortunately, if the child hasn't started speaking by age 5, then yes, then you're looking for a speech-related, language-related disorder, and then that needs to be assessed. But 5 years is also that point in their life when they start school. So now you have a fair sort of reference to what everybody else is able to do, and where is it that the specific child in question is maybe still struggling. That's where either daycare providers, teachers, other people who are involved, they may start pointing out that the child in question is struggling with something, they are unable to communicate, they are not compensating, they are not seeking the joint attention, then that's a challenge. If a 3-year-old is not responding to their name, that would be a concern. But first thing would be, let's get their hearing checked. Because if the hearing is not developing, excuse me, normally or is not on track, then yes, in response to name or response to commands or asking them to do something, obviously is not going to go well. Let's check their vision. Because if there is an issue with the vision and they're not getting that input by the way of visual stimulation, yes, that would show in different behaviors, different types of difficulties. So the first 5 to 8 years of life are such that even though nervous system developed within the first 4 to 6 weeks of pregnancy, to now the child has been born, and the brain continues to grow. It gets to a point where it becomes unsustainably big because skull or your head is a closed cavity. Then brain decides based on the environment, the exposure, the learning experiences, that which parts of the neurons it needs and the part that it doesn't need, or how much of any of that is needed. And then brain shrinks down to what is considered the adult-sized brain. So that pruning of dropping some of the neuronal connections still is very dependent on, again, the environment, language exposure, engagement in age-appropriate activities. And that's why we don't jump to those conclusions that early, that something is wrong and something is not going to be okay, and this needs to be labeled, and this needs to be diagnosed, and this needs to be treated. That initial time period is still considered very transitional, very dynamic, and that is why we need to do our best to provide the opportunity for learning as best as we can. Usually, the types of behaviors that are difficult to manage are when either child starts to hurt themselves, by the way, banging their heads on harder surfaces, scratching themselves, pulling their hairs, or somebody else, biting. As soon as they start to get their teeth, then the biting. Those behaviors become very challenging because not a lot of people are comfortable dealing with somebody else's child who has those behaviors, because that requires physical intervention, and everybody's hands off these days. So for that reason, and that reason alone, a lot of children would be referred to different services. Parents would be looking for different ways of assessing their children, which is, again, reasonable question to ask, but not the time to jump to any major conclusions unless proven otherwise. And yes, there is a very small percentage of children that you can see as early as 2-3 years of age that they are on a different trajectory. So that is the major bulk of learning disorders, intellectual disability disorder, autism, and even more specific disorders. But my advice to most parents who come through my clinic, that the first 5 years, you're just gathering the information. You're not necessarily making any final decisions. 5 to 8 years, now you need to definitely start paying attention to that the child may have a different style of learning, different personality, different way of processing information. So then you need to start changing approach according to that. Past 8 to 10 years of age, yes, then definitely you're looking for some modified way of what is it that's going on with the child, why is it that the child hasn't responded to most standardized interventions, and why we are struggling. So when child has a speech and language disorder, if that is because of their inability to form the words, because that involves a lot of muscles, that involves the tongue, that involves the structure of the mouth, yes, that would make their ability to speak difficult. But if they have the understanding, and if the other part of the brain that is involved with processing information is still active and functional, you can still develop a mode of communication that still works for them and still can help them, but reliance is not on their ability to say the word, because that means that the brain is not sending the signals to those muscles, that part of the speech area, and child just gonna have more lifelong disability when it comes to forming the words. So people who are born mute, they can't speak, they can't sort of say the words, but their understanding and ability to process information is normal. They can learn the sign language, learn to communicate, and still achieve their highest potential. So just the ability to say the words is not the make or break point. It definitely causes barriers when child is young, and teaching them a different mode of communication, then finding the environment or the place where people are effective and efficient in using sign language, that's the challenge. But if those services are provided and those needs are met, we don't necessarily see those individuals struggling besides that one way of communication. If we have established that the dysfunction is only in one area, which is reading, like dyslexia, or comprehension, calculation, then those are considered specific learning disorders, and requirement for which is that you have to have intelligence in normal range. We talked about it last time that the 70 is the cutoff mark. Intelligence above 70 is not in the disability range, but 71 to 79 is still borderline. Anything 80 and above is considered average. 100 be the mean, 15 points below, 15 points higher, 85 to 115. 97.5% of us are within that range. It's the 2.5% higher and the 2.5% lower that you have difficulty with. And the disability range is, sorry? If they score higher, what is that problem? Then those children find it hard to connect with kids their age. They understand or process information beyond their years. Their interest is different, what is considered normal or within that age range. So they find it not interesting, they find it boring, they find it just not stimulating. So they hear that information, they already know the answer, they don't necessarily have to put any effort into it, so they check out. Or again, they may exhibit some behaviors which just suggests that somehow they're not connecting. And that exactly is the challenge. Children who doesn't have the ability, they would present the same way. Because they're also not connecting, but they're not connecting because they're not understanding. Versus the ones who have higher understanding, higher abilities, and this is not challenging enough.
So this is a test that the teachers provide, or is it not?
Teachers can start. Teachers can do the academic testing. But that still is the initial first step. That tells us that when 100 children, that age group, that grade level, when tested, how does this child compare to them? So it's the 1 to 100 percentile system. Anything below 10th percentile is in borderline range of intelligence. 2nd to 9th is that borderline. Anything below 2nd percentile, then it's a disability range, which means that 100 children, when tested, 98 or 97 did better than them.
So it'll be like in a setting, not individual? Or?
No, it would be individual. It would be individual. It's a standardized testing. Results are derived from testing a lot of children, and the way scores are translated is in the percentile system.
I teach a student, and for the past 2 years, I've been trying to teach him like the alphabets in Arabic, and he's not able to do it, and he's like, I think 8 or 9 years old by now. So he's 10? Okay, so he's like, so I'm
That's definitely worth exploring.
Right. So I told the mom to look into it, but I think the parents are like in denial or something, I'm not sure.
But this is a double or dual language household?
Yeah.
Yes.
Their second language is not Arabic. It's another language.
There's a first language as the,
English.
okay,
There's Bengali.
okay,
And then Arabic is for the Quran.
okay. So how's the child doing in English and Bengali?
I think okay.
Okay, so at least now the baseline is that the child has ability to certain degree.
He does struggle with spelling and stuff like that in English.
Right. So that is exactly how we need to separate those out. Versus somebody whose only first language is English, that's the only language they're learning in, and they're still struggling. Right? So then we need to explore furthermore that what is their baseline. Again, if they're not hearing, that's one thing. If they can't see or their vision is not the best, that's another sort of deficit, which leads to less input, less processing, less information, right? So if child is doing okay in 2 other languages, which is whatever is considered for that age range, and then the added 3rd language is the struggle, then again, we need to look for other possible reasons. So because it's a process of exclusion, we have to take out the more common, more better understood causes first. For example, if child has difficulty with their thyroid gland controls majority of our body's functions. We know the impact on their learning and development can be significant just from one deficiency, which is the thyroid hormone. So unless that is addressed, you know that their learning curve is just going to be very challenging. So when we have excluded most or everything possible that we understand and we know of, then yes, then we are left with what are the possible genetic issues, possible developmental issue, possible neurological issues. So one example would be seizures of all different kinds. But obviously, the generalized tonic-clonic seizures being the most significant type of seizure disorder that has the most impact on nervous development, nervous system development. There is the highest likelihood and highest comorbidity, what we call, with other disorders. So if a child is not treated for their seizures or their seizure disorder is resistant to treatment, then we know that the development is not going to be up to par. So for those reasons, we have to start at the widest base, which is this is a 7-year-old child, grade 1, grade 2 level. What their abilities should be, what we consider through standardized assessment and in comparison to their peers. If we establish that this individual child is more than a grade level behind, that should raise some alarms. If those difficulties are complicated by further behaviors, their unwillingness to come to school, or even when they're in school, they have all kinds of tantrums and issues, if they are aggressive either towards others or themselves, then that's the added layer that we need to understand and assess, that what happens before, what happens during, and what happens after that behavior. And that's how we sort of backtrack to what is the actual trigger, how is it that we can modify that trigger that doesn't lead to that outburst, hence then what the outcome is going to be. So from that perspective, when we are looking at, for example, stuttering, because child has the difficulty of getting the words out, they stutter, people don't understand them, people ask them to repeat themselves, they try again, they can't get it out, they are likely to become more and more anxious around that. More anxious they get, more difficult it becomes for them to say the words, and the stuttering can look like it's worse in that moment. So unless it's understood, unless it's addressed, unless they are helped with that, then you can see that the child has difficulty with verbal communication, but they're also becoming anxious. And because it feeds off of each other, it becomes more and more difficult as they grow, till either they finally reach that point where they understand, they learn some coping skills or some management strategies, and they finally start to work through it. If the social communication disorder, which is a relatively new term, which catches the general difficulty when it comes to using the nonverbal communication, reading the nonverbal cues, engaging and seeking the attention from other people, then you have to focus on that if they have the ability and they're capable, and then what is it about the environment or the child or the expectation that maybe is causing the problem? And then you try and address it, because we have established that the child has the ability, there are certain other factors playing part in it. But if they have social difficulties, if they have communication difficulties, and they are so rigid and ritualistic, then you're looking at a different diagnosis of autism. So a lot of symptoms overlap. It's the quality of impairment that separates them out. And more you start to pay attention to that quality of impairment, better are the chances that we can help intervene early on, can help them through this, and they can get on whatever their learning curve is. It may not be the same as everybody else, but whatever their own learning curve is, they still at least can continue on that. So motor disorders, for example, developmental coordination disorder, which suggests that the child's ability to engage in motor activities, organize, plan, and learn to balance is affected above and beyond their age level. So obviously that child is not going to be first and foremost to get in front of everybody or be willing to even try things out that they are uncomfortable with. So you can see that the challenge is, even though their motor coordination, but it starts to affect their social and communication skills. More they get asked, so people think they are encouraging the child, not recognizing that the child has difficulty at a different level, and more you coax and prod, more anxious they're going to become and more reluctant they will become. So unless you modify the expectation, for which then you would need an occupational therapy assessment that tells you exactly what their motor profile is, what their sensory profile is, what are their abilities, what are their difficulties, and then you start with the skill that you know they are capable of. More you start with that, higher is the likelihood the child would engage, child would participate, would get better, and feel better. So when we are talking about any repetitive behaviors, that be making noises, some motor movements, so repetitive involuntary movements of different parts of your body are called tics. So one tic, that be a motor tic or a vocal tic, does not specify anything else besides child has some involuntary motor or vocal movement. But you combine two motor tics, two motor movements, and one vocal tic, then it becomes Tourette's. And the challenge is that they don't have to be all together. So child had one tic, had it for 6 months, went away, 2 years down the road, another one came, that disappeared, third one came, then that becomes the diagnosis. Problem with Tourette's is because it's involuntary, they don't have the ability to control. They have the urge, and then they have to follow through with it. Younger children would struggle obviously more because they don't understand this is socially inappropriate, this is something that is disruptive, that is something that is not socially acceptable. But as they grow older and they're now exposed to any inappropriate information, that be foul language, that be in sort of appropriate physical gestures, and if that becomes part of tic, that is very socially disruptive and difficult for social environments, especially school, to manage. They would just blurt out an appropriate word. They will just blurt out things that are considered unusual. But if they have vocal tics, which is sometimes throat clearing, sometimes they make some sniffing sounds, that also can become challenging, especially coming out of COVID. Everybody is on high alert if somebody's sick with anything. So child doesn't have the ability to control, they're too young. We don't understand where that's coming from, and we keep pointing that out. You're doing this again, don't do this, this is not okay, this is not acceptable. Anxiety makes all these things worse, which is misperceived as, oh, they know, this is what's going on, and when we're telling them, they're doing it more. But coming from a completely different place. So challenge becomes that how we can normalize some of those behaviors in the younger children, and then they get to a point where their ability to understand and process information becomes such that we can actually help them, that you get this urge, fight it for 30 seconds. Then get up, go leave the space, get that tick out of your system, come back. Next time, try it for a minute, 45 seconds. That's how they can build that stamina, that strength, that yes, this is how I feel, this is what happens, and this is what I can do to work through it. But yes, everybody with Tourette's would tell us, I can control it for so long. After that, I have to go and take care of it. Go ahead.
The occupational therapist will be able to help with that?
Not necessarily Tourette's, because again, Tourette's is not a motor or sensory-based disorder. Tourette's is a neurological disorder, because again, that part of the brain that fires that impulse, and then child's inability to manage it.
So like a neurologist?
So we don't necessarily treat tics till they're sort of teen years at least.
Like how would you manage?
Yes, so the way to manage is education. People around them, adults, need to understand what's going on and not pay undue attention to that behavior that can, again, make it worse, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. More you try and address, more the child becomes anxious, he or she does more attention he gets.
And is it also hereditary because the father also has Tourette's and the
Yes.
child is also showing the same symptoms?
Yes. Most of these disorders do run in families. And it definitely increases the risk for the next generation. But the severity or the type, that can change. So somebody may have just motor tic, that they have certain parts of the body that just, they tick for a little bit, then it goes away. Not a lot of people may pay attention to it, or they learn to hide it, and life goes on. It's the vocal tics that get a lot of attention. A child sitting and out of nowhere, they just make a screeching noise. Very hard to ignore, very hard to miss. Gets all kinds of attention. So even when they're asked to leave the space so they can get the tic out of their system, it still is disruptive early on. They're still wasting time when everybody else is doing whatever they're supposed to. This child has to go take a few minutes out. By the time they come back, instructions are over. Now they're expected to do something that they don't have any idea what they're supposed to be doing.
For that parent, what kind of help should they seek, or who should they go to? The internet to get help?
Well, so yes, there are enough resources out on the internet, but it's about the environment that the child is supposed to be learning in. So not to single them out, not to sort of put that same expectation as you would on everybody else. So example would be when it's time for instruction and child has to leave. Because it's already established, agreed upon the strategy, they should be able to go, take care of it, come back, and when teacher is done, then they can take them aside and give them the instructions again. Then expectation may still not be early on that everybody else has to do 10 questions. The expectation for them is, let's start with 3. As long as you have done it, as long as you have put in the right effort, 3 is your expected number. But you can slowly sort of improve and grow from it. Because, as I said, anxiety makes all these things worse. So when they realize that they're behind, when they realize they're the only one waiting, when they realize that everybody's looking at them, that's what is different, what is unique about you, why do you get this special treatment versus everybody else, it all can interplay. So how to normalize is educate everybody, starting with the teachers, then the peers, but how much information needs to be given or how it needs to be explained, that can still be a challenge. So once we have done all these things that we are talking about, that the child moved to Canada from a different country, their first language is not English, and they haven't attended a structured school activity so far, and they are grade 2 age, it would be expected that the child is going to have some challenges. But are those the challenges that are just the lack of exposure, or they are above and beyond and they are more information processing difficulties? Only way to know is that give them a fair chance of being part of the system, give them the extra help that they may need, and then slowly but surely start setting those expectations and see if they are going in the right direction. So again, they may not be showing all their skills in a testing environment, which is time limited, which is self sort of governed, that you sit down, you only get up when you're done with the test. Unless you're done with the test and you have put all the information on the paper, nothing else matters, right? So expectations can still be modified. But what is it that we want them to do, and how much time, and what extra help and support that can still help them? So once we have done all those things, ruled out all the common medical causes, addressed any environmental issues, addressed any secondary issues that are unique to that child, and child is still not developing, progressing, or meeting those benchmarks, and they are somewhere in between 6 to 8 years of age, 6 to 8 years of age, then you start looking for more global dysfunction, that it's not one specific subject that they're struggling with, it's not one teacher that they're having all the difficulties with, it's not one environment that they're struggling with their social skills or ability to communicate. Then we start looking for the bigger sort of picture. And that's where the intellectual developmental disorder kind of comes into play. That now child has fallen behind more than a grade level in all subjects. Their inability to communicate verbal and nonverbal is below their chronological age. And it is with all the support that has been provided, and child is continually just behind and further behind and further behind. That's when a full psychoeducational assessment comes into play. A psychometrist can do it. Psychologists, psychiatrists can review the report and reach that conclusion that what percentile that child falls into. If it's below 10th percentile but above second, they're in borderline of intelligence, they still have the potential. We need to find a way to help them reach that potential. Anything in the mild intellectual disability range, which is IQ of 70 to 55. General understanding is that by the time that individual turns 18, their ability to understand, process information, and generalize information ends up in between 10 to 12 years of age. So a 10 to 12 years of age is grade 5, 6 level. Independent, can do basic reading, can do basic math, can do some problem solving, but still can be impulsive. If you send a 10-year-old with the grocery list, there is a possibility that they may come back with all candy and other stuff, and they didn't necessarily pay attention to the list of things that was needed, because they tend to be that impulsive. But we're talking about an 18-year-old functioning and performing at that age level, then that's a concern. And even though independence is there, even though their abilities are there, but any critical problem solving, that would be a challenge. So they are considered that they're teachable, because you may still need more repetition, you may still need to modify some of the expectations and slowly build them up, but you know that they would not be able to reach their age-appropriate level of functioning. And it's not that they get up to 10 and stop. They get to that level at one point in their lifetime. That's why 18 used to be a landmark point, but they may be still 25 and 30 and 35, and still their ability to understand and process is 10 to 12 years of age. So IQ between 55 to 35, what's considered intellectual disability moderate range. By the time they turn 18, their ability to understand, process, and generalize information falls somewhere in between 5 to 8 years of age. Now you're talking about kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 level. Again, they may have basic reading, they may have start to do basic math, but comprehension is still limited. Hence, the further critical problem solving goes lower. A 5-year-old or 6-year-old is not supposed to be out there on their own, for example. You can't just send them to Walmart. They may be able to go to a corner store if you know that there is no large traffic area in between, if the area overall is safe, and that being a corner store, which is supposed to be or used to be community place where a lot of people just knew each other, you would hope and believe that they can get there, practice it enough, they may be able to function and perform, but they would need a lot of supervision. So that level of function is considered trainable. They can become used to doing certain things by practice. They may not understand why it needs to be done and how it is sort of important and relevant to one situation, one environment versus every other environment. So a grade 5, 6 kid, again, depending on where they are, what their sort of level of maturity is, they may be able to go from point A to point B, as long as, again, there are no major risks involved. For a 5, 6-year-old, that's just never a reasonable expectation, because there's a much higher likelihood they would get distracted, they would just get carried away, or they're so impressionable and easily convinced that anybody can take advantage. Anybody can sort of influence them to making a wrong decision, wrong choice. Anything below 35 when it comes to IQ is definitely much more challenging, much more disabling. And those are not the ones that we have a lot of help and support for, because their challenges are such, and their challenges are much more unique in that sense. But it's the mild or high moderate range, because there is enough understanding that we still hope that we can help them get as far as they possibly can, become as independent as they can with the help and support that is appropriate for their age and learning. Because it's a range, it's not a single point information that you can use. You have to use a combination of different things. So they may still have good verbal expression. So they can say the words, they hear the information, they have the ability to repeat it, but their processing speed is still maybe way far below their age level, which means that they would require more time, even with the information that we know, that they have practiced, they are able to understand and learn, but now they need to be given the time to process that information. They finally reach that conclusion, which is appropriate for their level of intelligence. Do they have the motor ability or the sensory ability to still perform that task that's in front of them? So those are still the variables that we still need to pay attention to and hope that we can meet that middle ground based on their skills and deficits that would allow for a lot of the difficulties that they may have, but what is it that the environment or the individual in front of them can help them with. When it comes to specific learning disorders, because we talked about, for example, dyslexia, which is the learning disability in reading. They see the words, but brain perceives them differently. They can't tell the difference in between B's and D's written in lowercase. In their mind, they're still saying the right word. So they may be able to express themselves, but ask them to put the information on paper, they struggle. They have difficulty with the spelling. They have difficulty with making the sentences. And that can be very frustrating for a young child because in their mind, they have put in all the effort. They have done what they're supposed to, but adult says, no, this is not right. You need to go fix this. You need to start paying more attention. It still can become the challenge that can take the child away from that environment and they don't find it interesting and stimulating, again, can lead to behaviors. Anything with the reading, anything with the writing learning disability. So now they still have the information, but when it comes to put the information on paper, they struggle. The grammar is not correct. The structure of the sentence is not correct. And again, it's all in comparison to their chronological age. So they are grade 6, but they're still struggling when they're asked to write a paragraph of activities that they did yesterday. That would be challenging. They would still, in their mind, think that they have done everything right. Adults or teachers would say, this is not correct. And unless it's explained and unless it's broken down to the level where they can start making the connection, you may still run into different problems. So specific learning disorders are somewhere in between 5 to 15% of school-age children, which is a significant number. And it's a significant number because of a lot of difficulties, behaviors, and then the teacher and parents' disagreements. When teacher says that I have tried and I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and it's not helping, it's not progressing, what is it that you can do at home, or what is it that you're not doing at home, that's why it's causing these difficulties, not all parents have the ability to take that information constructively. Their initial reaction can be, that's not our child, that's not anything concerning, it's actually school environment or your teaching method. All the while, child is the one struggling. And when they start seeing this disagreement, and when they start hearing information that parents talk about teachers or teachers talk about a school, home environment, that again can take them away from or changes their focus from school is for everybody. It is a place, an environment for learning, and everybody learn at their own pace. It all becomes about who's doing what wrong, what is not right about teaching style, teaching method, or home environment, or how the instructions are given. And it's not as specific to age, it's not as specific to any sort of socioeconomic status, but we all can agree that the parents who can afford to buy more services, they have higher likelihood of catching these issues earlier on. They may be able to address these difficulties earlier on, hence the outcome can still be different.
What about the food? I think food also has an effect.
Yes, yes. Food is the gas in the end, in the tank of the car. So if
A lot of wealthy people would be able to afford
yes,
organic meat, whereas
yes. So the good and the bad is that yes, as much as we are learning about the organics and as much as we're learning about the processed food and healthy food, we still have a lot of sort of wide range in between. Not every child who's eating processed food is struggling. Not every child who is being brought up on organics doesn't have the difficulties, right? But it's the middle population in both that do okay, and it's all on the extremes that are struggling more. So example would be that if a child has ADHD, so we have found enough connection in between processed sugars, color dyes for the food, that a lot of parents would say, yes, I know if my child has eaten those things, that is going to be a difficult day versus the days when we can control it and sort of offer them better choices, they would do better. Yes? those things make the difference. And in those specific number of children, some of the sort of socioeconomic challenges may play part, but again, luckily still we are not seeing that direct correlation. As I said, that the ones who are eating 100% healthy have no issues versus somebody who doesn't have any availability and they're all struggling. But overall, yes, we all should practice better healthy lifestyle choices, which includes nutrition, which includes hydration. In the name of hydration, if we are gonna use all these drinks out there and juices which are loaded up with all kinds of processed items, that's no better. If we are talking about physical exercise, which is extremely important for a developing child, let alone anybody, any age, there are challenges. It's not easy to enroll children in all kinds of activities and keep running around 7 days a week. That still takes enough toll on just not the system, parents, child, siblings, other family members, that the most active children may still struggle. Because now they really are so chaotic from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep, that they still have no ability to consolidate any skills. They're constantly challenged, they're constantly being judged, they're constantly being reminded of what they're not doing right. That still can cause challenges. Sleep, definitely. We know that sleep is the only time where the human brain has the ability to recover from all the chaos and damage that we put it through for all the waking hours. And that's why the nighttime sleep is the only sleep that matters. So naps can be a good supplement because that was an exceptionally hard day. They played sort of soccer and then they had to go do something else and they had been on the go, they didn't necessarily eat that much or drink that much that their bodies sort of dragged down. Nap can help. But nap cannot be the replacement of the nighttime sleep. So 8 to 10 hours of sleep for up to 10 to 12 years of age is recommended because they are going through the most developmental time, which requires more relaxation, more de-stressing. That need goes down as we get older because now we don't need that level of brain development and brain growth. So yes, most adults can function for 6 to 8 hours of sleep. You get further older, need for sleep goes further down. So yes, those healthy lifestyle choices, and definitely we have to add the screen now. So the screen time, no screens whatsoever for an hour before bedtime. That does not, there is no exception to that. We make exceptions because that's the life we live. We are going to find out last minute there is a project due tomorrow. We are going to find out that something has happened on the other side of the world and we need to go look for those news. Or somebody shows up unannounced and now parents have to attend them. Children are not necessarily going to go to bed at the time that they were expected to. Yes, those exceptions are just few examples, but hope always is that the children, the younger the children, the more structure, more support, more organization they need. Because that's how they learn to self-regulate. That's how they learn to cope, to deal with a lot of those stresses. Then they become the second nature or the habit. We don't need to emphasize them as much in their adult lives. When it comes to children's performances, their ability to function, it's not just child's ability, it's not just child's skills. There are other confounding factors. For example, what is in it that activity or that learning for a child? Do they understand why they're engaging in those activities? Why is it that it's important for them? Why is it relevant to them? So if it can be explained to them in a way that it makes sense to them and they connect with that activity, yes, it would increase the likelihood that they would learn, perform, and do better. Environment and parents being the most significant part of that environment. Parents' temper, parents' ability to be available, parents' ability to be flexible. Those are all the added factors that still would reflect on child's ability to function. You and I would know when child shows up to the school the next day. That what is it that happened the night before? What is it that happened the evening before? What is it that happened the afternoon before? And we would be scratching our heads that, okay, I don't understand why is this happening on Wednesday afternoons versus Friday mornings. But more we pay attention and start to sort of document, you may start seeing a pattern. And then that information you can take back to a parent. I have your child Monday to Friday, this time to this time, this is how I run my class, this is my sort of curriculum, and your child still is doing okay 3 other days, but these specific times, these specific days, they're struggling. Can you help me with what happens the day before, the night before, or what is expected the next day that may be contributing to it? So it's not necessarily that you are suggesting that they're doing something wrong. You're just trying to understand that that maybe is when parents work late Tuesdays. So they don't come home, children are not getting dinner on time, not going to bed on time, they're not sleeping enough that night. So if Wednesday is a challenge, that's real life. We can't really tell a parent that, okay, you need to start working less because then they have other responsibilities. So things of that sort obviously are relevant, are important, and how is it that it's communicated to the child? When we see a child is struggling, how are we approaching that issue? How are we telling them what to do, how to do it? Because it's much easier to tell them what not to do. Don't scream, don't run, don't do this. That's very easy. Unless it's paired with what they can do, there is, again, depending on their age, their ability to understand, process information, response can still be very different. And that's why same parents can have 2, 3, 4 children in the house. They still may be doing same thing with everybody, but every child responds differently, depending on their personality, depending on their age, depending on their ability to understand. Is it Maghrib time? Oh, okay. Well, that's when we will finish for today. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Wait.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.